Welcome to the She Wins podcast. I am your host, Elisa Devine, award-winning and best-selling author. When one woman tells her story, it inspires more women to do the same. Domestic violence thrives in secrecy. So to eliminate it, we tell our stories, we open the conversations, and we identify changes to be made. And that is what we are doing here today. Christina Williams, welcome. I'm really excited to get to talk with you today. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. Christina's short story and photographs are featured in the book #SheWins2. And you can read more about her story and ways that you can, reach out to her. The book is on Amazon. And Christina, I'd like to start talking today about what you shared with me about how your ex-husband did not want you to continue your education.
Yeah, I didn't realize until I spoke at the vigil at the local university that I attended last week that I didn't put that in the book, and I had talked about it in my speech. And when I had previously spoken in 2019 at the same vigil, I spoke as a student and a survivor, because the first time I spoke, I was a prevention educator in 2014. And I had talked about that when I was there in 2019. And the day that a month before I left him, I went to the admissions office at the local university. It was a branch of Penn State where we were living in Pennsylvania. And I had the appointment, and I went and I took my son, who had just turned 2, and we had a really good time. She took us around the small campus. She gave him like a little stuffed animal in Penn State football, and he sat and played while we did the paperwork and everything. And I just had to get transcripts sent, and I would have been all set to go. And I got home, and he was putting a stand together for the living room. And I was telling him about my day, and then I don't really remember the specifics. And like I said in my speech, I have some memory loss in that moment, and I don't know if that's the PTSD, the trauma, blocking it out. But the next thing I remember is that I was in the dining room, and I was, being thrown around against the wall and then onto the floor and being kicked and being told that I wasn't, going back to school, and that, I wasn't going to be better than him and smarter than him and, all that stuff. And this coming, and like I said in my speech, this coming from a guy who didn't finish high school, tried to go back to get his GED when I encouraged him. And then when he couldn't understand it or handle it, he quit. So,
Wow.
and then, the local, there was a local family that had a couple restaurants that I worked for, and they had bought another restaurant, and they were going to have me run it after I started my first year of school for hotel restaurant management.
Okay.
And I had talked about that, and he was like, you're not going to end up doing that. He's like, you won't even make it through the first year. And
Wow.
things like that. And so, he just, you're not going to do it. You're not smart enough. You're not, all kinds of stuff. And then eventually he left me alone that night. And I remember my stepson was in the living room, and I don't know I know he was probably just frozen and scared, but I remember my son crying because he got scared. And, but yeah, I mean, that's just all that I remember about that situation. But so yeah, when I graduated last semester with a criminal justice degree at Lockhaven University after 4.5 years, it was a big, bittersweet deal to me.
For sure.
And it was kind of like that one little notch of, I love the saying, success is the best revenge.
Yes.
And that was like my first little notch of, my revenge, I guess, so to speak, in a more positive way. And I don't think he knows that I graduated, nor do I care. But and then the book was the second little, notch of success to release this. And so only good things can come from this. And but yeah, that was a big part, and I don't know why I forgot to put that in there. I remember finishing the story, and it didn't dawn on me till I spoke. So it was.
Well, I think that it's really normal to turn off some of those memories from our
Mhm,
brain because it was traumatic for you. And so that is like
mhm,
our brain's way of protecting us,
mhm,
by not remembering.
mhm,
I have several situations like that too. So, but um,
mhm,
I think though, let's talk about this more because I think this is more common than what we speak of normally. And so I think maybe
mhm,
people it can help other people identify, if those kind of behaviors are going on in their own relationships. But first I want
mhm.
to ask you, so did you start then with your education after you left him?
Well, this fight that happened when I went to the admissions office was a month before I left him. So I ended up leaving him a month later, went into the women's shelter. It wasn't, that was 2012, April 2012. I did not start back to school until January 2017, that spring semester.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So
So it took me a while. Yeah.
do you think that that was like one of the final, the last straws?
It was one of them. Yeah, it was one of them. And then we had an argument the day that I left. And that was where, and I knew that I had wanted to leave. It was just finding that window and finding that way out.
Right.
He had threatened to get, well, my biggest fear was if children and youth got involved, they would take my son because I had my stepson there too, but I didn't want them to take the kids. And
Right.
so, you don't know how they're going to handle it sometimes. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that happens a lot. And like I look back on my relationship and we got married. I think I still had like a year of college left around the time that we got married. I got a bachelor's degree in elementary education, and like right away, like after I graduated from, I got my bachelor's degree. I knew that I wanted to start working on my master's degree for teaching, and I remember him saying, well, you're not working, like we shouldn't pay for this if you're not working. But to me, like that was just an excuse. You know what I mean?
hmm,
Because he's like
yep.
been very manipulative and controlling. But I think back about that often, and let's open this conversation about this because you said some things about your story that make me think that it's a theme going on here where
Hmm,
in some ways they feel insecure and not enough. If you're
hmm.
educating yourself and you're going up to the next level and you're doing all the things that you want to
Yes.
do, for some reason it makes them feel less than because they're not.
Yes, exactly. And they don't want you to do better than them because that's part of the abuse cycle. They want to beat you down and they want to keep you from progressing in your life, and because they know that they'll never do those things, and they feel like the world owes them and they're entitled because that's part of the narcissistic personality.
Yeah.
And so therefore they're never going to go do any of the things that some of us have set out to do.
Right.
And I feel that's a huge thing. It took me 5 years to go back to school, and I think a lot of it was I still had in the back of my head, you can't do it, you're not smart enough, like, nobody's gonna want to work with you, or you're not gonna, you're gonna fail. I mean, just all kinds of stuff that he used to say. And finally I was just like, you know what, I'm going back to school.
Yeah.
And
Wow. I mean, like first of all, it's amazing that you went through with it and you did it. Like, were you just like so proud of yourself when
I
graduated and you were done?
it was very emotional. I remember like the last 2 weeks of school. it was very emotional because I had a professor. He taught Intro to Spanish for Criminal Justice, and I had crossed paths with him prior to going back to school in my healing process, when I was going to counseling, him and his wife, and they do really great work in the community. And I just briefly crossed paths with them, and I couldn't remember how I knew him when class started. Well, then when we were talking during office hours about something, I said something to him, and I told him about some of my story, and he convinced me to talk to the class. And I talked to the class about, everything. And, I didn't, the good, the bad, the ugly. And it was just, there was only 6 of us in the class, but the younger kids were just like, wow, they were speechless when he asked them to give feedback, and they had some really great feedback. And,
Okay. Do you mind sharing for that?
Yeah. I talked about, when I left and the day that I left, and how I stayed at the women's center that I ended up staying at was the old one for the first 3 days. And the building that ended up being the new one, I drove by quite a few times going to work thinking it was just another apartment building being built. And I ended up as one of the new clients with my son, with many other women. And I was the minority. It was predominantly Hispanic and African American. It's a heavily populated Hispanic area in the Reading area. And, there was a lot of support there. And I met some great women. Unfortunately, I lost touch with a couple of them. I don't know where they are now. I hope they're okay. And then I talked about, coming home. And when I came home, I had a DUI about a month after I got here. And then I had another one 90 days later. I was a mess. I was on medication for anxiety, depression, sleeping. My PTSD was just horrible, and I had to see the doctor at least once a month. And, that was a hard part. And I regret that, to this day. And then I carried a lot of guilt and shame from that for the next couple of years. And even though I was in counseling, I still ended up 2 years later having another DUI in 2014, and still not having fully healed. And then I had to deal with a family member that was very narcissistic and abusive. Again, the people that I lived, the family members that I stayed with, the significant other of the relative was very emotionally, mentally, and verbally abusive, and pushed me over the edge. It was my biological father's girlfriend. And so, yeah, it was, and then they ended up, when I had my second DUI, they took my son from me. My mom and my stepdad didn't have a chance to step in and, say, you can stay with us. Like, we'll get this figured out. They swooped in and filed an emergency custody order and took them from me. And she lied to CYS and said that I saw him that morning when I had the second DUI, and I didn't. I was stayed at my mom's the night before. I was nowhere near my child. Okay. And so I was only allowed weekend visits supervised at my mom's where I was staying, because I moved out of their house and into my mom's. And that went on for like 6 to 8 months. And then finally I was allowed to be with him without any supervision. So yeah, I mean, I went from one abusive relationship to a whole other level of abuse from a family relative perspective. And I'm not, like I said, I take full responsibility for my DUIs, and I wish that I never, would have been so not in the right mind, because, I could have hurt other people. I could have killed somebody. I could have altered other people's lives forever, not just mine, my son's, my family's, somebody else's, other people's. And I talk about that sometimes, like when I talk to the students that day, I mentioned that as well. And, I was very emotional because I cried and I was angry and I went through all the emotions. So that was a huge weight that was lifted off. And thanks to my professor, like one last thing before I graduated, and, I feel like it all worked out the way it was supposed to. Right. And he was such a great support system, and I still keep in touch with him. And he ended up coming to graduation, so I was able to get a picture with him. And but yeah, he got me to tell my whole entire story, which I had avoided when I talked to classes and I talked with my professors and stuff. So And some of them knew from working at the Women's Center that I was a survivor. So they would always ask if I would talk or give feedback in certain criminal justice classes. And yeah, it was very powerful, and it was very freeing at the same time, because, there is substance abuse issues among victims and survivors of domestic violence. And also abusers tend to use as well. My ex-husband did, and they get mean and nasty when they use, and no one really talks about survivors when they're, healing and dealing with their PTSD and how they cope. And, I've moved on, and I found so many different ways to cope. I don't need to do that anymore, and it's been 10 years since I left him. And then it's been about, 2014, 2015. It's been a good 6-7 years since I got a handle on everything. So, and my son's back with me. He's been back with me for almost 4 years now. And, I had to get on my feet. I had to, get an apartment, all that stuff. So it was, and I had to get through counseling and get myself better before I could get him, back full time. So it was, it was a long, long road.
It is. And I think that, first of all, thank you so much for sharing and being vulnerable on this, because, this is some of the parts that, that we don't have enough awareness around, because it can happen and you don't realize what is actually the root of the problem. You know what I mean? You think, so often we think, well, since we're gone and out of that relationship, that everything should be fine. But it's so often that it, the trauma is not properly dealt with at the time. And so it continues and manifests in other ways of coping, like you mentioned, through substances, and so do you remember, was it an awareness that you had, was it the DUIs that happened, or what was it that where you were there's more going on here? It's not just that, it's not that, the alcohol is not the problem, right?
Yeah, it was, after the second DUI, I had my hearings, and I had never been in trouble with the law before for anything.
Yeah.
And they put them together in one case, and I got 3 years probation and double fines and double everything. My probation officer ended up being a guy I went to high school with, that I graduated with and briefly dated back in the day.
Wow.
And he didn't know it was me because of my married last name. And we hadn't seen each other in 20 years. I lived away for a long time. And when he came out to get me, he was like, what? So I sat down and I told him what was going on, and he was like, okay. And then because he was like, this is not the girl that I went to school with, And he was just in shock that I went through all that. And I told him, and I said, I wish that I wouldn't have drove, and I don't know why I did. And he had mentioned rehab, and I was like, oh, no. Even my family. And I was like, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking drug addicts go to, and I shouldn't have had that mindset, but I did at the time, because people put such a stigma on going to rehab and having issues with alcohol and drugs. And I was so still sitting in my embarrassment and shame and guilt and anger and resentment towards my ex-husband. And so I was just full of all kinds of emotions. But he said to me, it's 90 days, because I didn't want to leave my son. That was my biggest thing.
Okay.
And it was 90 days. And he said, listen, 90 days and you get better, or 9 years and you may not be alive.
Wow.
Because you don't know what road you're going to go down if you continue to not get your issues figured out, get help, the counseling that you need to get past the trauma. And so he was my voice of reason. And he was the only one that I had actually listened to at the time, which I don't know why, but I did. So I went to a rehab.
You had a connection with him, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I didn't want to listen to anybody else at the time. And the family members that I were living with, that were the woman that was pushing me over the edge and doing everything she could to make me crazy and walk on eggshells and everything else like I had previously done with my ex-husband.
Yeah.
It was a lot. And when I went to an hour and a half, 2 hours away, and the counselor that I ended up with was one of the best counselors there. I lucked out. Amanda, I still, when I was there, I had one of the best counselors I probably could have ended up with, Amanda, and I still keep in touch with her. After the 2 years, you can't keep in touch with your clients for 2 years. So after that was up, we connected on Facebook. And she actually was amazing. And she didn't look at like the alcohol use itself. She like went into the trauma and everything that happened. And I got some stuff out that happened back in the day, because I had been sexually assaulted when I was 17 by a high school athlete that went to another school. And I don't want to say too much about that because people are still in town. And it wasn't anything I talked about, but she got all that out. And the one thing, I had so much hate and resentment and anger and all kinds of, negative feelings going on.
Yes.
And she had me do 10 days of gratitude, and I had to write 10 things I was grateful for.
Oh.
And that little activity turned it all around for me amazingly. And I always thank her at least once a year. Every year I'm always like, thank you so much for getting me through. And she's like, I didn't do anything. You did the work. I gave you the tools.
Yeah.
And so that turned it all around. And then I completed everything and I came home. My son was able to come see me twice while I was there. My family brought him, and my family sent cards and letters. I had a friend send me a letter a couple times and, wrote him back. And so I completed everything, and I had a different outlook when I came out. And then I went on to eventually, I found work, and then I became a manager at Walmart. And then I went on to, things weren't really great there. So it so happened that the prevention education spot opened up at the local women's center. And so I put my resume in, and they brought me in, and I had no bachelor's degree in education or anything like that. And I put together a program for kids, and I ended up getting the job. So I went on to work for the very center that helped me out 2 years prior to that. So it was it was great. I learned so much while I was there. I went to a lot of conferences. I went to a lot of trainings. I was very fortunate. And then I did a lot of work at the university, and that was my niche. And I worked with 2 professors there. One I actually ended up having for class in criminal justice. And then Dr. Schillig, who's the director of the Hope Center that holds the vigils. I've been in touch with her throughout. I didn't have her for class, but she's always been in touch with me throughout working together for stuff. So the university's had a huge part in my journey, actually.
Wow. It's just so many like full circles, I feel like, in your story, like it comes back around. It all comes back around.
And here's the last
work, when you do the work on yourself, like you did the work.
Yeah.
You went through it and you healed yourself.
Yeah. And, and when I was in school, I was raising my son and working, and, I still struggled with anxiety and depression a little bit. I mean, I do take medication, to help that. And I'm not ashamed of that anymore because, it's part of it. And if it's what I got to do to get better and stay better, and I found ways to cope. I do art journaling, and I do crafts, and I paint. And that's a huge thing for me. You have to find ways to, because there's still stuff that's triggering. Like I remember a few months ago seeing something on TV that reminded me of something that my ex-husband did to me that I had totally forgotten about. Yeah. Things still pop up. And, I had panic attacks in July. I was going through some anxiety. And then this month, October was a little heavy with the book coming out and speaking at different things. And, and I handled it, and just had to take a couple self-care days. But one of the biggest things about coming full circle is the book, part of my story in this book. And I talked about this at the vigil because it's just awesome to me. I had to write an essay, a descriptive essay, the first couple weeks that I went back to school for intro to English composition. And she said, write something you're knowledgeable about. So I had a 4-hour window till my next class, and it was on a Friday. And so I'm like, okay, what am I knowledgeable about? Prevention. I just did prevention education a few years back, domestic violence, sexual assault. And then I was thinking about the other programs I did. And I was like, well, you live domestic violence. Why don't you write about that? And then the day that I left flashed before my eyes. And so I sat there and started typing, and I didn't stop till I was finished. And I had 4.5 pages about the day that I left, and I called it The Great Escape. So half of the story was born on the campus, my first semester back.
I love it.
And I talked about that at the vigil, and even Dr. Schillig was like, that gives me chills. She's like, as an English professor, she's like, that's wonderful. And I think it's inspiring for other students. And, and I didn't realize it until a couple of weeks before I was actually going to speak. And I was like, what am I going to talk about? And I was like, a light bulb went off at like 3 something in the morning when I couldn't sleep.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, this story was born on that. I wrote it on campus, and I graduated from this campus, and it's been a part of my journey for the last like 10 years. It's actually pretty it's an overwhelming feeling.
I'm sure, like so many emotions in there.
Yeah.
And, it's really interesting because it reminds me too, like every woman that I work with and I get to talk with, on domestic violence, like I can take pieces of each woman's story and relate to them, and I was just thinking as you were talking about that, like I remember one of the English professors that I had a minor, I could teach, English and in middle school. And one of the professors that I had to write a story and two, like at the time, like I was like maybe 20 or something. And so I didn't even, think about being in an abusive relationship or recognize it. And I remember I wrote this story about a waitress, and like she had like a winning lottery ticket or something. But he told me that my story was trite. And like that's like one of the worst things that you can hear, right? Like it's already been it's already been done. And he said, I remember him telling me, you just need to have more life experience. And I was like, what does that mean? You know what I mean? But I think back to that like so often now, and now, I have 4 books out on domestic violence. And I'm like, holy shit, I did get the life experience, you know what I mean? And that's what I ended up writing about. But it's just kind of like crazy.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's awesome to hear that bit of your story and to, see what you've done with everything, because it's been an amazing journey with this book. And, it's been overwhelming in a good way. And it's been somewhat of a healing too. And it's lifted some more weight that I don't think I realized was there. And it's also allowed me to grow some more, And
I know, it's like I kind of get to like sit back when I start to work with people, or they like decide that they want to participate in telling their story and, doing the books and everything. And I'm like, you have no idea what's going to happen in this process. You know what I mean? Like I can warn them a little bit, you know what I mean? Like this is going to change you, but it's not till they actually go through and they look back and they're like, wow, like I had to really, you know what I mean? Like I did all the things, like I did all the things.
I didn't know what to expect. And then we had some setbacks because of COVID to get the book, finished. But at the same time, there was this huge support of all these women in the book, and everybody was so supportive and encouraged me when I graduated. And it was just so overwhelming in a good way again. And it was like, like this is sort of like a tribe, my tribe for me. And, everybody's so supportive of each other, and it's great. And, reading everybody's stories, I could relate to something in some way. And I noticed, like, if anybody that reads the book will see the same patterns across the board for abusers and what they do.
Right.
And but yeah, it's been awesome.
I'm so thrilled that, I've had the chance to get to work with you and to just see you
Yeah.
thrive and grow and just get
Yeah.
so comfortable and, speaking your truth and sharing your story and using your voice. It's been really beautiful.
Yeah, because you've watched me go through some motions of anxiety and stuff, and
Yeah.
have, me telling you what's going on, and, going through the motions of having, anxiety and panic attacks and this and that. And throughout, not that it happens all the time, it's just been one bout, over the summer, and then a little bit last month. But and you were so supportive, and I appreciate that. And
Of course, my pleasure.
yeah, it was just, it's been a great journey.
It has. It has. I love it. Like, that's my favorite thing about the work that I get to do is the people, the
Mhm.
people. It's all about the people and like watching them, grow and
Yeah.
thrive. And I want to end the podcast by going back to 2 points that we've talked about. And the first one is on, your ex being very against you having education, and just
Mhm.
kind of going back to like that thing that I think that, like it just really kind of has me realizing that like they are so broken,
Yes.
damaged, and maybe they've had trauma in their past, you know what I mean? And it's not an excuse, it's not like a justification for their behavior, but it's more like a cry for help, that change needs to happen. Like maybe it's mental health, I do think that that is a very large component of it, but it just has me thinking more and more about how they need to do those things. They need to experience
Yeah.
education and healing and self-care and all that stuff.
Yes, because a lot of times narcissists are not born that way. They're bred, and, out of dysfunction and abuse and trauma and, other things. And, if they don't fix themselves, then nothing's going to change.
Right.
And I've known a few people that have been through some things, and they didn't turn out that way, and they didn't let it break them. But
Wow.
um, why people choose not to heal and choose to continue to act narcissistic. And, I believe it's becoming more of an epidemic than ever. And
Yeah. Right. Yeah,
mhm.
it's something that needs to be addressed for sure. And the other thing that I wanted to ask you about is, you mentioned that you had to, like, after your DUIs and everything, that you had to learn new ways of self-care and of coping.
Yes.
And I know um, touch base on like a few of those, but can you go into like a little bit more details just so that we can leave people with some ways that maybe they could
Sure.
help to cope with their traumas or anything that they've experienced that's been difficult, other than,
Yeah.
and other ways to deal.
The one big thing I think that is important to say is that don't be stubborn, and talk to like, if your family is around and you have supportive friends,
Hmm.
relatives, anybody who's supportive, talk to them. Don't be stubborn, get it out, because I was like that.
Yeah.
And now I've learned not to be. And my mom is like the first person I call when something, she's been, and my Aunt Debbie, like, they've been two sorry, I'm gonna get emotional.
That's okay.
um
That's all right.
they've been two of the biggest supporters, and without them, I don't know where we'd be. And the rest of my family as well, my cousins, my dad who raised me. And well, he is my dad, there's no other way around that. You know, my grandmother, all my aunts and uncles. And I'm so grateful, because some people, their families shun them when they go through domestic violence. And, I still have my family. And, along the way, I learned that I pushed people away, and I kept them at like a 500-foot distance for the last 5 years. And I actually have become friends again with a childhood friend and another friend from high school. And we've the three of us have become really close. We're all moms. Two of us are single moms, and our kids are driving us nuts sometimes because they're all around the same age.
Yeah.
But just not to get off topic, but I do a lot of art journaling. If you're not sure what that is, for anybody listening, Google that. I do journaling, and getting it out and writing it out helps. I have several different journals that I write in. I keep a gratitude journal. That's the biggest thing.
Oh.
And I also recommend the book The Secret. If you have not read it, get it, read it, because after I got out of rehab, I found that book crossed my path and I read it.
Yes.
And there's a whole series of 4 books, and I just finally finished the 3rd one, because when I was in school, reading extra stuff was just not, happening.
Right.
And so I'm finally getting to the last book, and that's kept me going as well. Where I live, there's a huge river that runs through the state, and we have a dike here, and it's actually 2 blocks out from my house. And so I like to, take walks out there, and
Okay.
you can see all the mountains where I'm at, because I'm in a pretty, I'm in a small area, but there's a lot of mountains around us.
Okay.
And it's beautiful. And what else? I like to read magazines. I love fashion magazines. I can sit and read those from, cover to cover. And those are just a few of the things that I do to cope. I'm trying to think of anything else.
Those are really good tips. And I always say, and I think that you and I have talked about this too, just one last thought here, when things seem more challenging, than usual, or difficult circumstances appear, that is the time to double down on your self-care, on your extra ways of coping, and, just really take more time than what, you might be used to doing to, take care of yourself, really.
Yeah. Yep. It's important. It's very important.
Well, Christina, thanks so much, for being vulnerable and sharing your story. I just always believe that when, we share our stories, we can help other people by doing that, and they can take little pieces from it and identify with it, and, get those tools that, can take them to deeper levels of healing too. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes. All right. I will talk with you soon again. Thanks, Christina.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for participating in the #SheWins conversation today. If you have questions you'd like me to answer on a future podcast, or if you're looking for advice, or if you're ready to tell your story, email info@alisadivine.com.